The massive crystal dome of the Grand Assembly Hall stretched high above the heads of hundreds of alien beings. Light from 3 different suns filtered through the transparent walls, casting strange colors across the floor. Representatives from 47 different worlds sat in curved rows, each species in their own special section designed for their unique needs. Admiral Sarah Chun stood at the center of the hall, looking very small compared to the giant creatures around her. Her dark blue uniform looked plain next to the bright robes and gleaming armor worn by the other military leaders. In her hands, she held a simple datapad that contained Earth's military report. The human section was near the back of the hall. Only 12 humans had been allowed to attend this meeting. They sat quietly, trying not to draw attention to themselves. Earth had joined the Galactic Council just 5 years ago, and they were still considered the new kids who did not really belong. "The floor recognizes the human representative," announced Speaker Veltar, a tall being with blue skin and 4 arms. His voice echoed through the hall with a tone that suggested he found this whole thing boring. Sarah walked to the speaking platform in the center. As she moved, she could hear whispers and small laughs from the alien sections. She had heard these sounds before during the past 5 years. They always made the same jokes about humans. "Honorable members of the council," Sarah began, her voice clear and steady, "I present Earth's annual military capability report." She pressed a button on her datapad, and holographic images appeared in the air above her head. The first image showed Earth's orbital defense stations. They looked like simple metal rings around the planet, nothing fancy or impressive. From the Zephyrian section came a loud snort. War Marshal Crusade was a huge creature that looked like a cross between a rhinoceros and a praying mantis. His species had conquered 12 star systems and were known for their powerful weapons and aggressive tactics. "Chemical rockets and metal stations?" Crusade said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "How quaint. Do they still use gunpowder too?" Laughter rippled through several sections of the hall. The Etherians, who looked like floating jellyfish made of light, pulsed with colors that their translators said meant amusement. The Vorthak delegation, bird-like creatures with silver feathers, clicked their beaks in what passed for chuckling among their kind. Sarah continued without showing any reaction to the mockery. The next hologram showed Earth's fleet of warships. There were about 200 vessels of various sizes. They had clean, simple designs with no fancy decorations or glowing parts like the ships of other species. "Our fleet consists of 237 vessels," Sarah reported. "They are equipped with kinetic weapons, electromagnetic pulse systems, and nuclear deterrence." This time the laughter was louder. Senator Thylix from the Krillian Empire, a reptilian being with scales that changed color with his mood, turned bright orange, which meant he found something very funny. "Nuclear weapons?" Thylix hissed. "Did someone say nuclear weapons? What's next? Are they going to throw rocks at their enemies?" "Maybe they use slingshots for long-range attacks," added Commander Zefta from the Hegemony Worlds. Her species looked like walking trees with too many eyes. The Vorthak delegation started making chittering sounds that their translators called extreme amusement. Their leader, Admiral Sektith, spread his silver wings wide as he spoke. "Forgive me, human," Sektith said in a voice like wind through metal. "But your weapons technology seems to be several thousand years behind the rest of the galaxy." "Kinetic weapons? We stopped using those before we invented faster-than-light travel." Sarah nodded politely and continued her presentation. She showed images of Earth's ground forces, their aircraft, and their defensive systems. Everything looked basic and simple compared to what other species had shown in previous years. The Zephyrians had plasma cannons that could melt through any known material. The Etherians had energy weapons that could tear apart matter at the atomic level. The Krillians used something called quantum disruptors that could make enemy ships simply disappear. Even the smaller species had weapons that seemed like magic compared to human technology. "Our ground forces number approximately 50 million active personnel," Sarah continued. "They are equipped with projectile weapons, armored vehicles, and conventional explosives. War Marshal Crusade stood up from his seat, his massive form casting a shadow over several rows of delegates. "This is ridiculous," he bellowed. "Why are we wasting time listening to this? Their entire military could not defeat a single one of our patrol ships." Murmurs of agreement came from around the hall. The hegemony delegates were making gestures that meant they thought this was all very silly. The Stellar Federation representatives, who looked like metallic spiders, were clicking their legs together in patterns that their translators said meant waste of time. Speaker Veltar raised one of his four hands for quiet, but his expression showed that he agreed with Crusade. "Please continue, Admiral Chun. I'm sure the Council is interested in hearing about your defensive capabilities." The way he said interested made it clear that nobody was actually interested at all. Sarah could see beings in the audience checking their personal devices, having quiet conversations, or simply staring off into space showed the final set of images from her datapad. These were pictures of Earth space monitoring systems and early warning networks. They looked like simple metal dishes and basic computer systems. "Our defensive strategy relies on early detection and coordinated response," Sarah explained. "We maintain monitoring stations throughout our system and have established communication networks with neighboring systems." This brought another wave of laughter. Admiral Sektith flapped his wings in what was definitely mockery among his people. "Early warning systems?" Sektith squawked. "What do you do when you detect an enemy?" "Send them a strongly worded message." "Asking them to go away?" The Etherian delegation pulsed with bright colors that meant they found this hilarious. One of them, Ambassador Luxara, floated higher than the others as she spoke. "Perhaps they plan to defeat their enemies with politeness," Luxara said in a voice like singing crystals. "Or maybe they will bore them to death with talks about peace and cooperation." Even some of the usually serious delegates started laughing at this. The Quantum Collective, beings made of pure energy contained in mechanical bodies, actually made sounds that their translators called electronic giggling. Sarah finished her presentation and walked back toward the speaking platform's edge. As she did, she could hear more comments from the audience. 50 million soldiers with metal weapons," someone whispered loudly. "My homeworld's police force could handle that." "I heard they still fight wars on the surface of planets," came another voice. "Instead of just destroying the planets from space like civilized people." "Primitive doesn't even begin to describe it," added a third speaker. War Marshal Crusade stood up again, this time to address the entire assembly. "I move that we excuse the humans from future military presentations," he announced. "Clearly they have nothing to contribute to our collective defense. Perhaps they could focus on growing food or making simple tools for the more advanced species." This suggestion brought the loudest laughter yet. Several delegates applauded the idea. The Krillian section started chanting something that their translators said meant, "Back to the caves." Speaker Veltar looked at Sarah with an expression that might have been pity. "Admiral Chung, does Earth have anything else to add to this presentation? Any hidden capabilities we should know about?" Sarah stood quietly for a moment, looking out at the sea of alien faces. Some were still laughing. Others had already gone back to their personal conversations or devices. A few were looking at her with something that might have been sympathy, but most just seemed bored or amused. "No, honored speaker," Sarah said finally. "This completes Earth's military capability report." "Very well," Veltar replied. The Council thanks Earth for its thorough presentation. Next, we will hear from the Stellar Federation about their new quantum torpedo technology. As Sarah walked back to the human section, the hall filled with excited chatter about the Stellar Federation's presentation. Nobody was talking about Earth anymore. They had already moved on to more interesting topics. The human delegates sat in uncomfortable silence as the Stellar Federation representative, a mechanical spider the size of a small car, demonstrated holographic images of weapons that could destroy entire moons. The technology was so advanced that even the other species seemed impressed. "Remarkable," breathed Ambassador Luxara from the Etherian delegation. The precision is extraordinary, indeed, agreed Admiral Sektoth. Such weapons would be invaluable in our ongoing border disputes with the Void Stalkers. Sarah took her seat among the other humans and quietly put away her datapad. Around her, the other human delegates looked embarrassed and frustrated. Colonel Martinez, sitting to her left, leaned over and whispered angrily. "They're treating us like children with toy soldiers," he said quietly. "Let them," Sarah replied, her voice so low that only Martinez could hear. "Sometimes it's better when people underestimate you." The presentation continued with more demonstrations of advanced alien technology. Planet-cracking bombs, ships that could travel through dimensions, weapons that could stop time itself in small areas. Each new capability brought gasps of admiration from the audience. When the Stellar Federation finished, War Marshal Crusade stood up again. "Now this is what real military power looks like," he declared, "not like the primitive toys we saw earlier." More laughter filled the hall. Sarah noticed that some of the smaller species were joining in now, probably hoping to gain favor with the more powerful members of the council. "Perhaps we should establish a special category for developing worlds," suggested Senator Thylix. "Somewhere they can play with their simple weapons without embarrassing themselves in front of the grown-ups." The suggestion was met with enthusiastic approval from most of the delegates. Sarah watched as species after species nodded their agreement. Even some of the humans looked like they wanted to sink through the floor in shame. Speaker Veltar called for order again. "We will consider all suggestions for improving future presentations," he announced. "For now, let us move on to the next item on our agenda." As the meeting continued, Sarah sat quietly and listened to more discussions about military technology and defensive strategies. Nobody asked for human input. Nobody seemed to remember that Earth was even part of the Council. But Sarah remembered something that none of these laughing, superior beings knew. She remembered the real reason why Earth had joined the Galactic Council 5 years ago. And she remembered what was hidden in the dark spaces between stars, waiting patiently for the day when it might be needed. For now, though, she was content to let them laugh. 3 months had passed since the humiliating presentation at the Grand Assembly Hall. Life continued as normal throughout the galaxy. Trade ships moved between star systems, diplomatic meetings were held on schedule, and the various species went about their daily business without much worry. Admiral Sarah Chun was in her office on the human embassy station orbiting the Council homeworld when the first alarm sounded. It was a soft beeping sound that meant someone was calling her on the emergency communication line. She pressed a button on her desk, and the face of Commander Wells appeared on her screen. "Admiral, we're getting reports from the outer monitoring stations," Wells said, his voice tight with concern. "Long-range sensors are picking up something big moving toward the galaxy's core systems." Sarah sat up straighter in her chair. "How big?" "Unknown, ma'am. The readings are ... unusual, whatever it is. It's massive and it's moving fast. The Vorthak were the first to detect it. They're calling an emergency council session." Sarah nodded grimly. "I'll be there in an hour." The Grand Assembly Hall looked very different during an emergency session. Instead of the casual atmosphere of a regular meeting, there was tension in the air. Delegates hurried to their seats, speaking in urgent whispers. The usual jokes and laughter were nowhere to be heard. Speaker Veltar called the session to order with all 4 of his hands raised high. "Council members, we face a situation that requires immediate attention. Admiral Sektoth of the Vorthak will present the findings." The silver-feathered bird-like being flew to the center of the hall, his wings spread wide with worry. As he landed on the speaking platform, holographic displays filled the air above him. 3 days ago, our deep space monitoring stations detected a massive fleet approaching from the void between galaxies, Sektoth announced. Initial scans suggest over 50,000 vessels of unknown design. Gasps and shocked murmurs filled the hall. Even the usually calm Etherians began pulsing with colors that meant alarm and fear. The holographic display showed star charts with a red arrow pointing toward the galaxy's center. The arrow was enormous, suggesting something much larger than any fleet anyone had ever seen. "We have identified the threat," Sectith continued, his voice becoming even more serious. "They are the Devourers." The name hit the assembly like a physical blow. Several delegates stood up in shock. Others began talking frantically to their neighbors. The Devourers were spoken of in whispers throughout the galaxy. They were a legend, a nightmare story told to frightened young beings. War Marshal Crusade from the Zephyrian delegation stood up, his massive form trembling with what might have been fear. "Are you certain? The Devourers are just stories. Old tales, meant to scare children." "I'm afraid not," Sectith replied. "We have confirmed their identity through analysis of their ship designs and movement patterns. They match historical records from the 17 star systems they have already consumed." The hall erupted in panicked voices. The mechanical beings of the Stellar Federation were clicking their legs so rapidly it sounded like machine gun fire. The hegemony delegates were making high-pitched sounds that their translators called extreme distress. Speaker Veltar had to use an amplified voice to restore order. "Silence! We must remain calm and work together to address this threat." Ambassador Luxara from the Etherian delegation floated higher than usual, her light form pulsing with rapid color changes. "What do we know about their capabilities? How long do we have?" Admiral Sectoth manipulated the holographic display to show more detailed information. "Based on their current speed and trajectory, they will reach the Outer Council worlds in approximately 6 weeks. As for their capabilities?" He paused, his feathers rustling with anxiety. "They are unlike anything we have faced before." The display changed to show images recovered from the last systems to encounter the Devourers. What the Council members saw made many of them wish they hadn't looked. The Devourers' ships were dark, angular things that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They moved in perfect formation, like parts of a single massive organism. But most terrifying of all were the planets they left behind. Where once there had been thriving worlds full of life, now there were only empty husks drained of everything useful. "They don't just conquer," Sectith explained. "They consume. Every bit of metal, every drop of water, every living thing. They strip planets down to bare rock and then they move on to the next system." Senator Thylix from the Krillian Empire was the first to speak after the horrifying images disappeared. His scales had turned a deep purple color that meant serious fear among his people. "What is our combined military strength compared to theirs?" Thylix asked. "Our total fleet strength across all council members is approximately 12,000. "Vessels," Sectith replied. "They have 50,000. But numbers alone don't tell the whole story. Their technology appears to be ... adaptive." "What does that mean?" demanded Commander Zefta from the hegemony worlds. "It means they learn from every attack," Sectith explained. "Historical records show that weapons which work against them initially become useless after a few battles. They adapt their defenses." In real time, the implications of this sank in slowly. The assembled delegates began to understand that they weren't just outnumbered. They were facing an enemy that could evolve faster than they could change tactics. War Marshal Crusade stood up again, this time without any of his usual arrogance. "We must mobilize immediately. Every ship, every weapon, every soldier. This is a fight for the survival of our civilization." "Agreed," said Ambassador Luxara. "The Etherian Collective will commit our entire fleet to the defense effort." One by one, the major military powers of the galaxy pledged their forces. The Vorthak would provide their advanced reconnaissance ships and tactical expertise. The Krillians would bring their quantum disruptors and heavy assault vessels. The Stellar Federation offered their planet-cracking torpedoes and shield technology, even. The smaller species promised to contribute what they could. The Quantum Collective would provide their energy weapons. The hegemony worlds would supply their massive carrier ships filled with fighter craft. As each species made their commitment, eyes gradually turned to the human section. Sarah Chun had been sitting quietly, listening to the discussions without saying a word. Finally, Speaker Veltar addressed her directly. Admiral Chun, what can Earth contribute to the defense effort? Sarah stood up slowly. Around her, she could feel the mixture of hope and doubt from the other delegates. They needed every ship they could get, but nobody expected much from the humans. Earth will commit our entire fleet, Sarah said simply. 237 vessels, as reported in our last military assessment. There was a moment of awkward silence. Everyone remembered the primitive weapons and simple technology that Earth had shown just 3 months ago. 200 ships with kinetic weapons wouldn't make much difference against 50,000 advanced alien vessels. War. Marshal Crusade tried to be diplomatic. Every contribution is valuable, Admiral Chun. Your ships can support the main battle lines. We'll take the rear guard positions, added Senator Thylix, his scales showing the color pattern for polite dismissal. Keep the humans safe while the real military forces engage the enemy. Sarah nodded without any sign of offense. As you wish. Earth's forces will take whatever position the Council deems appropriate. The emergency session continued for several more hours as military leaders worked out logistics and battle plans. The strategy was simple: meet the Devourers at the edge of Council space with overwhelming force and try to stop them before they reached any populated systems. The greatest military minds in the galaxy worked together on the plan. Admiral Sektov would coordinate reconnaissance and early warning. War Marshal Crixak would lead the main assault forces. The Etherians would provide long-range energy bombardment while the Stellar Federation ships used their quantum weapons to punch through enemy lines. Human forces were assigned to protect supply lines and evacuate civilians if the main battle went badly. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone understood that the humans were being kept out of the real fighting for their own safety. 2 weeks later, the combined Council fleet assembled in the Helix Nebula just outside the galaxy's main spiral arm. It was the largest gathering of military forces in galactic history. 12,000 ships from 47 different species, all working together against a common threat. Admiral Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the Earth flagship, a simple vessel called the Terra Nova. Through the main viewer, she could see the vast array of alien warships spread out across space. Massive Krillian dreadnoughts bristled with quantum weapons. Elegant Etherian ships glowed with contained energy. The mechanical precision of Stellar Federation vessels was obvious even from a distance. Compared to these marvels of technology, the human ships looked like ancient relics. Their simple metal hulls and basic weapon systems seemed almost primitive. In comparison, Admiral, called Lieutenant Park from the communications station, we're receiving the final battle plan from Council Command. Human forces are to remain in Sector 77, approximately 50,000 kilometers behind the main battle line. Sarah nodded. Acknowledged. Signal all Earth vessels to take position as ordered. As the human fleet moved to their assigned position, Sarah watched the alien forces prepare for battle. She had to admit they were impressive. The coordination between different species was remarkable. The sheer firepower they could bring to bear was staggering, but Sarah also remembered something else. She remembered the classified files locked away in the deepest vaults of Earth's military archives. Files that contained the real history of humanity's expansion into space. Files that told a very different story about human military capabilities. For now, though, those files would remain secret. Earth would play the role assigned to them by the Council. They would be the primitive species with simple weapons, staying safely in the rear while the advanced civilizations fought the real war. The first contact with Devourer scouts came 3 days later. Long-range sensors detected small groups of enemy ships probing the edges of the Council formation. Admiral Sektoth dispatched Vorthic reconnaissance vessels to investigate. The reports that came back were troubling. The Devourer ships moved in ways that seemed to ignore the normal laws of physics. They could accelerate and turn faster than should have been possible. Their hulls absorbed sensor scans, making it difficult to get accurate readings on their capabilities. "They're testing us," reported Admiral Sektoth during the daily command briefing. Probing our formations, studying our tactics. They're learning about us before the main battle begins. War Marshal Crusade was confident despite the troubling reports. Let them study us. When our full fleet engages them, they'll see what real military power looks like. The confidence was shared throughout the Council fleet. They had the best technology in the galaxy. They had tactical expertise built up over thousands of years of warfare. They had the advantage of fighting together on familiar ground. What they didn't have was experience fighting an enemy that could adapt to any weapon or tactic within hours of encountering it. The main Devourer fleet arrived exactly when the calculations predicted. 50,000 dark ships emerged from the void like a spreading stain across the stars. They moved in perfect coordination, forming attack patterns that no organic mind could have devised. The Council fleet moved to intercept them, 12,000. Ships against 50,000. The odds were terrible, but the alien commanders were still confident. They had quality on their side. Even if they lacked quantity, the first engagement began with long-range energy bombardment from the Etherian ships. Beams of pure light lanced across space, striking the leading edge of the Devourer formation. Several enemy ships were destroyed immediately, their hulls unable to withstand the concentrated energy. Cheers went up throughout the Council fleet. The enemy could be hurt. They could be defeated, but within minutes, the situation began to change. The next wave of Etherian attacks seemed to have less effect. The Devourer ships were already adapting their defenses. Learning to absorb or deflect the energy weapons, the Stellar Federation launched their quantum torpedoes next. The first salvo was devastatingly effective, causing entire sections of the enemy fleet to simply vanish from existence. But by the third salvo, the torpedoes were being intercepted or neutralized before they could reach their targets. "They're adapting faster than we anticipated," Admiral Sekteth reported, his voice tight with worry. "Weapons that worked minutes ago are now useless." War Marshal Crusade ordered the Zephyrian assault ships forward. Their plasma cannons opened fire at close range, melting through enemy hulls with superheated matter. For a brief moment, it looked like the close-range assault might work. Then the Devourers began returning fire. Their weapons were unlike anything the Council forces had seen before. Dark energy beams that seemed to drain the life from whatever they touched. Projectiles that phased through shields as if they weren't there. And most terrifying of all, some kind of virus weapon that turned Council ships against their own allies. The battle that was supposed to be a decisive victory quickly turned into a desperate retreat. Council ships fled in all directions as the adaptive Devourer fleet overwhelmed their defenses and turned their own tactics against them. In the space of 6 hours, the greatest military force in galactic history had been shattered. Thousands of ships were destroyed or captured. The survivors limped back toward Council space, carrying the terrible news of their defeat. The Devourers, meanwhile, continued their advance toward the core worlds, their dark fleet now swollen with captured Council technology and the knowledge of how to defeat everything the galaxy could throw at them. From her position in the rear guard, Admiral Sarah Chun watched the disaster unfold with growing concern. Around her, the other human ships maintained their assigned positions, waiting for orders that might never come. "Admiral," called Lieutenant Park, "we're receiving scattered communications from the retreating Council forces." "It sounds like they're in full retreat," Sarah nodded grimly. "Signal Earth Command. Tell them we may need to implement Protocol 7 after all." "Ma'am?" Park looked confused. "I'm not familiar with that protocol." Sarah looked out at the approaching Devourer fleet, now enhanced with stolen Council technology and adaptive capabilities that made them nearly unstoppable. "No reason you should be, Lieutenant," she replied quietly. "It's been classified for over 200 years, but I think it's time to dust off some very old files." The emergency session in the Grand Assembly Hall was very different from the last one. 3 weeks had passed since the disaster at Helix Nebula, and the mood was one of complete despair. Many seats were empty because their owners had died in the battle. Others were absent because their species were too busy evacuating their homeworlds to attend meetings. Speaker. Veltar looked older and more tired than Sarah had ever seen him. His blue skin had taken on a gray tint, and his forearms moved slowly as he called the session to order. Council members, Veltar began, his voice heavy with defeat. We gather today to discuss our remaining options in the face of the Devourer. Advance, Admiral Sectith will provide the current tactical assessment. The Vorthic Admiral flew to the center platform, but his usual grace was gone. One of his wings had been damaged in the battle, and he moved with obvious pain. His silver feathers were dulled, and many were missing entirely. The situation is grave, Sectith reported. Our combined fleet has been reduced to fewer than 3,000 operational vessels. The Devourers have absorbed our technology and adapted to all of our weapons. They now possess quantum disruptors, energy weapons, and plasma cannons in addition to their original capabilities. Holographic displays showed the current positions of both fleets. The Devourer Armada, now grown to over 60,000 ships through captured Council vessels, was moving steadily toward the core worlds. The remaining Council forces were scattered and retreating. How long until they reached the core systems? Asked Ambassador Luxara. The Etherean's light had dimmed considerably, and her usual bright colors were muted with grief. At their current speed, approximately 2 weeks, Sectith replied. We have evacuation ships moving civilians from the outer colonies, but there simply isn't enough time to save everyone. War Marshal Crixak stood up from his seat, but the massive Zephyrian looked broken. His proud bearing was gone, replaced by the slouch of defeat. Nearly half of his species' fleet had been lost in the battle. What about the defensive installations around the core worlds? Crixak asked. Surely they can slow the advance. The Devourers have studied our defensive strategies, Sectith answered. They know how to neutralize our fixed installations. The platforms around Zentari Prime lasted less than 4 hours against their adapted weapons. Senator Thylix from the Krillian Empire was the next to speak. His scales had remained the deep purple of fear ever since the battle. Are we seriously considering surrender, negotiating with these creatures? We've tried, replied Commander Zefta. They don't respond to any communications. They don't seem interested in anything except consumption. As far as we can tell, they view all organic life as nothing more than fuel for their expansion. The Hall fell into depressed silence. These beings had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. They had built vast civilizations, created incredible technologies, and conquered countless challenges. Now they faced extinction at the hands of an enemy they couldn't understand or defeat. Perhaps, said one of the Quantum Collective representatives, we should focus on preserving what we can. Seed ships to other galaxies. Ensure that our cultures survive even if our worlds do not. This suggestion sparked a brief discussion about evacuation plans and survival strategies, but everyone knew the truth. They didn't have enough ships to evacuate more than a tiny fraction of the galaxy's population. Billions would die when the Devourers arrived. Admiral Sarah Chun had been sitting quietly through the entire session, listening to the despair and defeat in every voice. Finally, she stood up from her seat in the human section. Honored Speaker, Sarah said clearly, I request permission to address the Council. The hall turned to look at her. Some faces showed surprise that the human representative wanted to speak. Others showed polite resignation, as if they were willing to listen to anyone who might have an idea, no matter how unlikely. The floor recognizes Admiral Chun, Veltar said wearily. Sarah walked to the center platform, just as she had 3 months earlier for her military presentation. But this time there were no mocking laughs or dismissive comments. The assembled delegates watched her with desperate hope, willing to listen to any possible solution. Council members, Sarah began, I need to share some information that Earth has kept classified until now. Information about our true military capabilities. This got everyone's attention immediately. War Marshal Crixak leaned forward in his seat. Ambassador Luxara's light flickered with renewed interest. Even the broken Admiral Sectoth turned to focus on Sarah's words. The presentation I gave 3 months ago, Sarah continued, showed only a small portion of Earth's actual military strength. We have learned, through centuries of our own devastating wars, that it is wise to never reveal your full capabilities until absolutely necessary. What are you saying? Demanded Senator Thylix, his scales shifting from purple to orange, with excitement. Are you telling us that humans have been hiding advanced weapons? Sarah nodded. I'm saying that humanity has spent the last 500 years preparing for exactly this kind of threat. We have been watching the galaxy, learning from every conflict, and developing technologies specifically designed to fight enemies that conventional weapons cannot defeat. She pulled out her datapad and activated it. But instead of the simple holographic displays from her previous presentation, the air above the platform filled with images that made the assembled delegates gasp in shock. The first image showed a human ship, but it was nothing like the simple vessels from the earlier presentation. The ship was sleek and dark, its hull seeming to bend light around it. It was larger than the biggest Krillian dreadnought, and its design was unlike anything anyone in the hall had ever seen. This is the Earthship Prometheus, Sarah explained. It is one of 50 vessels in our strategic defense fleet. Each ship is equipped with quantum-entangled weapon systems, matter-antimatter cascade bombs, and adaptive AI tactical networks. The next image showed an entire fleet of these mysterious ships. They moved in formations that seemed to flow like water, changing shape and position in ways that suggested incredible coordination. How is this possible? Whispered Ambassador Luxara. We've monitored your communications, your industrial capacity. There's no way you could have built such vessels without us knowing. Sarah smiled for the first time since the crisis began. Our actual industrial capacity is not located in this galaxy. Humanity began expanding into neighboring galaxies over 300 years ago. What you see here represents the combined resources of 17 different star systems across 4 galaxies. The hall erupted in shocked voices. The implications were staggering. Humanity wasn't the primitive, struggling species they had appeared to be. They were already an intergalactic civilization with resources that dwarfed anything the Council could imagine. But why hide this? Demanded War Marshal Crixac. Why pretend to be weak and primitive? Because, Sarah replied, we learned long ago that being underestimated is often the greatest advantage you can have. While you were building larger weapons and stronger ships, we were studying your mistakes and preparing for the enemies you couldn't defeat. The holographic display changed again, showing weapon tests that made the assembled delegates step back. In their seats, beams of energy that could destabilize stars, gravitational weapons that could compress matter into black holes, and most incredible of all, technology that seemed to manipulate the basic laws of physics themselves. These weapons are designed specifically to fight adaptive enemies, Sarah explained. Each system uses principles that cannot be easily copied or countered. Where conventional weapons rely on energy or matter, ours manipulate fundamental forces that exist at the quantum level. Admiral Sectith found his voice first. Are you saying you have weapons that the Devourers cannot adapt to? I'm saying we have weapons that work on principles the Devourers have never encountered, Sarah replied. Our quantum-entangled systems exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Our gravitational manipulators affect space-time itself, and our AI networks operate on quantum consciousness principles that make them impossible to hack or infiltrate. The excitement in the hall was building rapidly. For the first time in weeks, the assembled delegates were hearing something other than news of defeat and retreat. How many ships do you have? Asked Commander Zefta. Our strategic defense fleet consists of 50 capital ships, each more powerful than anything currently in this galaxy, Sarah answered. But more importantly, we have tactical systems that can coordinate the actions of every human vessel as if they were parts of a single organism. She manipulated her datapad again, and the holographic display showed a battle simulation. Human ships moved in perfect coordination, their weapons firing in patterns that seemed almost like a dance. Enemy vessels representing the Devourers, Tried to adapt, but the human tactics changed faster than the enemy could evolve. This is theoretical, of course, Sarah said. We've never actually fought the Devourers. But our simulations suggest that our adaptive AI can outthink their adaptive technology. War Marshal Crusade stood up, his earlier depression replaced by something that might have been hope. When can these ships arrive? How quickly can they get here? They're already here, Sarah replied calmly. The silence that followed was absolute. Every being in the hall stared at Sarah as if she had just announced that the suns were about to explode. What do you mean, they're already here? Asked Speaker Veltar. Sarah touched her datapad one more time. The main viewing screen of the assembly hall, which usually showed peaceful star fields, suddenly filled with an image that made everyone forget how to breathe. 50 ships hung in space just outside the station. But calling them ships was like calling a mountain a rock. These vessels were enormous, sleek, and beautiful in a way that seemed almost alive. They moved slowly through space, their hulls shifting and changing as if they were made of liquid metal. The Earth Strategic Defense Fleet has been monitoring the situation since the first Devourer scouts were detected, Sarah explained. We've been studying their capabilities and preparing our response. With the Council's permission, we are ready. To engage the enemy, the hall exploded into excited chatter. Delegates were standing up, pointing at the viewing screen, talking rapidly to their neighbors. For the first time since the disaster at Helix Nebula, there was hope in their voices. But Admiral Sektoth raised a wing for attention. Admiral Chun, these ships are impressive, but the Devourers still outnumber you 60,000 to 50. How can you hope to defeat such overwhelming numbers? Sarah's smile became wider and more confident. Admiral Sektoth, you're thinking about this in terms of conventional warfare. Ship against ship, weapon against weapon, but our approach is very different. The holographic display changed to show tactical projections that were unlike anything the Council had ever seen. Instead of traditional battle lines and weapon exchanges, the human strategy looked more like a complex puzzle being solved in real time. We don't plan to fight 60,000 ships, Sarah explained. We plan to turn their greatest strength into their greatest weakness. Their adaptive technology requires central coordination. Disrupt that coordination, and 60,000 ships become 60,000 individual targets with no way to share information. How do you disrupt something we don't even understand? Asked Ambassador Luxara. By understanding it better than they do, Sarah replied. Humanity has been studying adaptive AI for over 400 years. We know how it works because we built our own versions and then learned how to defeat them. The Devourer's biggest advantage is that no one has ever successfully fought their adaptation systems. But we have. She paused and looked around the hall at the faces staring back at her. These beings had spent months in despair, convinced that their civilizations were doomed. Now they were hearing that salvation might be possible. There's something else you need to understand, Sarah continued. Earth didn't join the Galactic Council 5 years ago because we needed your protection or technology. We joined because we had been monitoring your progress and we knew this day would come. We've been preparing for this specific threat for over 2 centuries. The implications hit the assembled delegates like a physical blow. Humanity hadn't stumbled into galactic politics as primitive newcomers. They had arrived as advanced guardians, watching and waiting for the moment when their protection would be needed. You've been protecting us all along, whispered Senator Thylix, his scales showing colors that meant awe and gratitude. It's what we do, Sarah replied simply. Humanity learned long ago that the strongest civilizations are those that protect the weak, not those that exploit them. We've been quietly watching over this galaxy because we believe the cultures here are worth preserving. War Marshal Crusade was staring at the massive human ships on the viewing screen. Why reveal this now? Why not continue to hide your capabilities? Because, Sarah said, the time for hiding is over. The Devourers represent a threat that requires our full capabilities to defeat. And because this council, this alliance of species working together despite their differences, represents something worth fighting for openly. She walked to the edge of the platform and looked out at the faces of beings from dozens of different worlds. We're not asking to take over your defense. We're asking for permission to fight alongside you. To use our hidden strength to protect something that took thousands of years to build. Speaker Veltar was the first to respond. Admiral Chun, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I formally request Earth's assistance in defending our civilization against the Devourer threat. Request granted, Sarah replied. Earth's Strategic Defense Fleet will engage the enemy in 72 hours. We suggest that all remaining Council forces be positioned to support our operations and assist with rescue and evacuation efforts. As the emergency session broke up into planning committees and tactical discussions, the mood in the hall had completely transformed. Where there had been despair, now there was hope. Where there had been defeat, now there was determination. The beings who had laughed at human primitive weapons 3 months ago now watched in awe as the most advanced military force they had ever seen prepared to save their civilization. But in the back of her mind, Sarah hoped that the weapons and strategies humanity had spent centuries developing would be enough to defeat an enemy that had already proven it could adapt to anything the galaxy could throw at it. The real test was still to come. The human fleet moved through space like shadows made solid. From the observation deck of the Council Command Station, Admiral Sektoth watched the 50 Earth ships take their positions with a mixture of awe and nervousness. Each vessel was larger than anything in the Council fleet, yet they moved with the grace of living creatures. I still can't believe we're seeing this, War Marshal Crixak said quietly. The massive Zephyrian stood beside Sektoth, his earlier arrogance completely gone. 3 months ago, we were laughing at their primitive weapons. 3 months ago, they wanted us to laugh, Sektoth replied. I'm beginning to understand that humans are far more complex than any of us realized. On the main viewing screen, long-range sensors showed the approaching Devourer fleet. 60,000 dark ships moved in perfect formation toward the core worlds. Their hulls absorbed light and sensor beams, making them look like holes in space itself. They would arrive at the battle zone in less than 6 hours. Admiral Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the Prometheus, watching the tactical displays with calm focus. Around her, the human crew worked with quiet efficiency. There was no panic, no shouting of orders, no dramatic speeches. They moved like parts of a well-designed machine. Admiral, called Commander Torres from the tactical station. All ships report ready status. The quantum entanglement network is active and synchronized. Sarah nodded. Signal the Council fleet to take position at safe distance. Minimum 50,000 kilometers from the engagement zone. Ma'am, said Lieutenant Park. The Council commanders are requesting permission to assist with the attack. Negative, Sarah replied firmly. Their weapons are useless against adaptive enemies, and their presence would only give the Devourers more technology to steal. This battle must be fought with systems the enemy has never encountered. As the human fleet spread out into attack formation, something strange began to happen. The ships started to change. Their hulls shifted and flowed like liquid metal. What had looked like traditional vessels now appeared to be something alive and organic. From the Council observation station, Ambassador Luxara watched in fascination. Are those ships transforming themselves? It appears so, answered one of the Stellar Federation representatives. The hull configurations are shifting into patterns I've never seen before. The human ships continued to change until they no longer looked like any vessel anyone had ever built. They resembled sea creatures from an alien ocean, flowing and undulating through space. Their surfaces rippled with energy patterns that seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. Devourer fleet detected, announced the sensor operator aboard the Prometheus. Range 2 million kilometers and closing. Estimated time to contact, 4 hours and 17 minutes. Sarah walked to the center of the bridge and activated the ship's communication system. All units, this is Admiral Chun. Initiate Phase 1 of Operation Silent Thunder. Begin quantum displacement. What happened next made the watching council delegates question everything they thought they knew about physics. The human ships simply vanished. One moment they were visible on every sensor, and the next moment they were gone completely. "Where did they go?" demanded War Marshal Crusade. "Unknown," replied Admiral Secteth, his voice filled with confusion. "They're not showing up on any of our sensors. It's as if they never existed." On the bridge of the Prometheus, Sarah could see everything perfectly. The quantum displacement system had shifted the human fleet into a parallel dimensional space. They could observe and interact with normal space, but nothing in normal space could detect them. "Fascinating technology," said Commander Torres. "We're essentially fighting from a dimension that the enemy doesn't know exists." "That's the theory," Sarah replied. "Let's see if it works in practice. Time to first contact?" 2 hours, 15 minutes, reported the sensor operator. The Devourer fleet continued its approach, completely unaware that 50 of the most advanced warships ever built were moving alongside them in dimensional space. The dark ships maintained their perfect formation, their adaptive sensors scanning for threats that they couldn't detect. "Admiral," called Lieutenant Park, "we're receiving a transmission from the lead Devourer vessel." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "They're trying to communicate? That's new. Put it through." The main screen filled with an image that made several bridge crew members step back in shock. The being that appeared was clearly artificial, but it had once been organic. Pieces of different species had been combined with mechanical parts to create something that was neither alive nor dead. "Resistance is unnecessary," the creature said in a voice that sounded like grinding metal. "Your biological and technological distinctiveness will be added to our collective. Surrender now, and your assimilation will be efficient." Sarah looked at the horrifying combination of flesh and machine on her screen. "I am Admiral Sarah Chun of the Earth Strategic Defense Fleet. You have entered Council space without permission and have destroyed 17 star systems. You will cease your advance and withdraw immediately." The creature on the screen made a sound that might have been laughter. "Earth, we have analyzed your species from the battle at Helix Nebula, primitive kinetic weapons and chemical propulsion. You pose no threat to our collective." "You might be surprised," Sarah replied calmly. "Surprise is not possible," the creature responded. "We have adapted to every weapon system in this galaxy. Your Council's plasma cannons, quantum disruptors, and energy weapons are now part of our capabilities. What can your primitive species offer that we have not already assimilated?" Sarah smiled coldly. "Something you've never seen before." "Chun out." The transmission ended, and Sarah turned to her tactical officer. "Commander Torres, how long until we're in optimal firing position?" 30 minutes, Admiral. "The enemy fleet will be concentrated in the Meridian System's asteroid field. Perfect location for our gravity weapons. Excellent. Signal all ships to prepare for Phase 2, full-spectrum quantum attack." 30 minutes later, the Devourer fleet entered the asteroid field exactly as predicted. The dark ships moved through the space rocks without concern, their sensors detecting no threats anywhere in the system. That was when the human fleet attacked. The assault began with weapons that the Devourers could not understand because they worked on principles that didn't exist in normal space. Quantum entangled beams reached across dimensional barriers to strike targets that had no idea they were being attacked. The first wave of Devourer ships simply ceased to exist. One moment they were flying through the asteroid field, and the next moment they were gone. No explosion, no debris, no energy signature. They were there, and then they were not. What happened to them? The lead Devourer creature broadcast on all frequencies. Where did our ships go? The human fleet remained invisible as they continued their attack. Gravitational weapons reached out to grab clusters of enemy vessels and compress them into points of infinite density. Hundreds of ships were crushed into black holes so small they evaporated almost instantly on the Council observation station. The watching delegates could only see the effects of the battle. Devourer ships were disappearing or being destroyed by weapons that produced no visible beams or explosions. It looked like the enemy fleet was being attacked by ghosts. Incredible, whispered Senator Thylix. The humans are winning, and we can't even see how they're doing it. The Devourers tried to adapt to the attack, but they couldn't adapt to weapons they couldn't detect. Their sensors showed no enemy ships, no energy signatures, no incoming projectiles. Their fleet was being destroyed by forces that seemed to come from empty space. All units, came Sarah's voice over the human fleet's communication system. Initiate Phase 3, Reality Anchor Deployment. What happened next was beyond anything the council delegates could have imagined. The human ships began to manipulate space and time itself. They created pockets of altered physics where the laws of nature worked differently. Inside these reality anchors, the Devourer's adaptive technology simply stopped functioning. Ships that had been invulnerable to every weapon in the galaxy suddenly found themselves vulnerable to basic kinetic force. Their advanced hulls became as fragile as paper. Their powerful shields became useless decorations. Impossible, the lead Devourer creature broadcast, its voice now showing something that might have been fear. Our adaptive matrices are failing. We cannot analyze the attack vectors. That's because there are no attack vectors, Sarah replied, her fleet still invisible to enemy sensors. We're not attacking you with weapons. We're changing the fundamental nature of reality around you. The Devourer fleet tried to retreat, but the human ships had surrounded them completely in dimensional space. Every escape route was blocked by vessels that couldn't be detected or targeted. How are you doing this? The Devourer creature demanded. What technology are you using? Technology you can't steal because it doesn't exist in your universe, Sarah answered. We're fighting you from a dimension. You can't enter and using principles your collective consciousness can't comprehend. The battle continued for 3 more hours, but the outcome was never in doubt. The Devourers had built their entire strategy around adapting to conventional weapons and tactics. They had no defense against enemies who could rewrite the laws of physics or attack from parallel dimensions. One by one, the dark ships were destroyed or captured. Some were compressed into gravitational singularities. Others were dissolved at the molecular level by quantum disintegration beams. A few were simply transported to empty regions of space where they would drift harmlessly for eternity. But the most remarkable part of the battle came near the end, when the human fleet began to do something unprecedented. Instead of simply destroying the remaining Devourer ships, they began to reverse the damage the enemy had caused. Phase 4. Initiated, Sarah announced. Molecular reconstruction and life restoration protocols are now active. The human ships began to rebuild everything the Devourers had destroyed. Broken council vessels were reconstructed from their scattered atoms. Dead crew members were restored to life using genetic templates stored in quantum memory banks. Even entire planets that had been stripped bare were reformed and repopulated. From the council observation station, the watching delegates saw their destroyed fleet slowly materialize in perfect condition. Ships that had been vaporized in the battle at Helix Nebula appeared in space as if they had never been damaged. This is impossible, Admiral Secteth whispered. They're bringing back the dead. They're reversing destruction itself. Not reversing, corrected Ambassador Luxara, her light pulsing with amazement. Rebuilding. They're rebuilding everything from nothing. On the bridge of the Prometheus, Sarah watched the reconstruction process with satisfaction. How many council vessels have been restored, Commander Torres? All of them, Admiral. 9,437 ships, exactly as they were before the first battle. All crew members have been restored to life with their memories intact up to the moment of their destruction. And the Devourer fleet? Completely neutralized. 58,712 vessels destroyed or captured. No survivors, but we've extracted their entire database of consumed civilizations. The reconstruction protocols can restore every species they've assimilated over the past 1,000 years. Sarah nodded with grim satisfaction. Signal the council fleet. Tell them they can return to normal space. The threat has been eliminated. As the human fleet emerged from dimensional space, they appeared around the remnants of the Devourer Armada. like avenging angels made of metal and light. The enemy ships that remained were dead hulks drifting in space, their adaptive technology permanently disabled. Admiral Chun, came a transmission from the Council Command Station. This is Speaker Veltar. On behalf of the entire Galactic Council, how do we even begin to thank you? Sarah's voice came back calm and steady. No thanks necessary. Speaker Veltar, we did what we came here to do. The galaxy is safe, but the reconstruction, the restoration of our lost ships and people, how is such a thing possible? When you can manipulate matter and energy at the quantum level, Sarah replied, death becomes just another engineering problem to solve. The human fleet began to form up for departure, their mission complete. The crisis that had threatened to destroy galactic civilization had been ended in a single battle that most observers couldn't even see. Admiral, called Commander Torres. All systems report mission successful. Ready to return to dimensional space for the journey home. Sarah looked out at the restored Council fleet and the debris of the Devourer Armada. Not yet, Commander. There's still one more thing we need to do. She activated the communication system one more time. This is Admiral Chun to all Council vessels. You might want to gather your representatives for one final meeting. There are some things about galactic security that we need to discuss. The battle was over, but Sarah knew that the real conversation was just beginning. The galaxy had seen what humanity could do when fully committed to a fight. Now it was time to talk about what came next. 1 week after the Silent War, the Grand Assembly Hall looked different than it ever had before. The same crystal dome stretched overhead, and the same curved seating arrangements held representatives from all 47 member species. But the atmosphere was completely changed. Where once there had been casual chatter and easy laughter, now there was respectful silence. Where delegates had once lounged in their seats with comfortable arrogance, now they sat straight with careful attention. Every eye in the hall was focused on the human section, where Admiral Sarah Chun sat quietly among her small delegation. Speaker Veltar called the session to order with more formality than anyone had ever seen from him. His forearms moved with precise ceremony as he addressed the assembly. Council members, Veltar began. We gather today to discuss the new realities of galactic security following the defeat of the Devourer threat. The floor recognizes Admiral Sarah Chun of Earth. Sarah stood and walked to the center platform, just as she had done twice before in this same hall. But this time, her footsteps echoed in complete silence. No one whispered, no one laughed. No one even seemed to breathe as she took her position. Honored delegates, Sarah began. I want to start by addressing the questions that I know are on everyone's minds. How long has humanity possessed these capabilities? Why did we hide them? And what does this mean for the future of the galactic council? She paused and looked around the hall at faces that showed mixtures of awe, fear, gratitude, and uncertainty. To answer the first question, Sarah continued, humanity has been developing these technologies for over 400 years. We began serious research into dimensional warfare and quantum manipulation shortly after we achieved faster-than-light travel. Admiral Sektuth raised a wing to speak. Admiral Chun, our records show that humanity achieved FTL travel only 60 years ago. How is it possible that you've been researching these technologies for 4 centuries? Sarah nodded, having expected this question. Because humanity achieved FTL travel over 500 years ago, not 60. What you detected 60 years ago was our first contact mission to this galaxy. We had been exploring other galaxies for centuries before we ever made contact with the Council. The implications of this statement hit the assembly like a physical blow. Several delegates stood up in shock. Others began talking rapidly to their neighbors. The Stellar Federation representatives clicked their legs so quickly it sounded like rattling metal. You've been watching us for centuries? Asked Ambassador Luxara, her light flickering with confusion and concern. Not watching, Sarah corrected. Protecting, there's a difference. We've been monitoring this galaxy for signs of threats that the local civilizations couldn't handle alone. The Devourers were exactly the kind of enemy we were prepared to face. War Marshal Crusade stood up, his massive form trembling with emotion. You let us struggle with our wars, our conflicts, our territorial disputes while you had the power. To stop all of it, Sarah's expression became more serious. Marshal Crusade, what you call struggles and conflicts, we call growth and learning. Every civilization must find its own path to maturity. We intervene only when faced with threats to existence itself. She activated her datapad, and holographic displays filled the air above the platform. But these images were different from anything she had shown before. They showed a vast network of galaxies connected by streams of light. This is the reality of human civilization, Sarah explained. We are present in over 300 galaxies. We monitor thousands of developing civilizations. And we have faced and defeated dozens of extinction-level threats over the past millennium. The scale of what she was describing was beyond anything the Council had imagined. They had thought of themselves as one of the great civilizations of the universe. Now they were learning that they were essentially children being watched over by adults they had never known existed. The second question, Sarah continued, is why we hid our capabilities. The answer is simple. Because we learned long ago that revealing overwhelming power too early prevents civilizations from developing their own strength. Senator Thylix from the Krillian Empire spoke up, his scales showing deep blue colors that meant serious thought. You're saying that if you had revealed your true capabilities from the beginning, we would have become dependent on you instead of growing on our own? Exactly, Sarah confirmed. Look at what this council has accomplished. You've created an alliance between dozens of species with completely different biologies, cultures, and beliefs. You've established trade networks, diplomatic protocols, and mutual defense agreements. You did all of this yourselves, through your own efforts and wisdom. She gestured toward the assembled delegates. If we had arrived 5 years ago with our full capabilities revealed, would you have worked so hard to build these relationships? Would you have developed your own technologies and strategies? Or would you have simply asked the powerful humans to solve all your problems for you? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around the hall, delegates began to understand what Sarah was really saying. Humanity had hidden their strength not out of deception, but out of respect for the potential of others. But surely, said Commander Zefta, there were times when revealing your power could have prevented suffering. Wars could have been stopped. Lives could have been saved. Sarah's expression became sad and distant. Commander, that is the most difficult part of being a guardian civilization. We have watched conflicts that we could have ended in minutes. We have seen suffering that we could have prevented with a single ship. But we have also learned that civilizations which never face challenges never develop the wisdom to handle power responsibly. The holographic display changed to show historical images from various council species. Wars, natural disasters, political upheavals, and technological breakthroughs, moments of struggle and moments of triumph. Every species in this hall has faced moments that seemed hopeless, Sarah continued. The Vorthok Civil War that lasted 3 centuries. The Krillian Plague that killed half your population. The Etherian Schism that split your people into opposing factions. You survived all of these challenges and became stronger because of them. Admiral Sectith nodded slowly, his silver feathers rustling with understanding. And if you had intervened, we would never have learned to overcome our own problems. Precisely, Sarah replied. The strength of a civilization is not measured by its weapons or technology. It's measured by its ability to face adversity and emerge stronger. The Council has proven its strength many times over. Speaker Veltar raised a hand for attention. Admiral Chun, this brings us to the third question. What does this mean for the future of the Council? Will humanity now take over our defense? Will we become a protectorate of Earth? Sarah shook her head firmly. Absolutely not. The Galactic Council will continue to operate exactly as it has. You will defend yourselves, govern yourselves, and make your own decisions about your future. Earth will not interfere in your internal affairs or impose our will on your civilizations. But what about threats like the Devourers? Asked War Marshal Crusade. How do we know when we're facing something beyond our capabilities? You'll know, Sarah replied with a slight smile. And when that time comes, we'll be here. Think of humanity as a backup system. We're the safety net that catches you when you fall from heights you couldn't have imagined climbing. The hall fell into thoughtful silence as the delegates absorbed this information. They were learning that their place in the universe was both smaller and larger than they had thought. Smaller because they were part of a vast community of civilizations they had never known existed. Larger because they had proven themselves worthy of protection and respect from beings with godlike power. Ambassador Luxara floated higher than usual as she spoke. Admiral Chung, may I ask about the restored ships and the people who were brought back to life? How is such a thing possible? Sarah's expression became more technical as she explained. When you understand matter and energy at the quantum level, death is simply a change of state. Every atom in a person's body retains quantum imprints of its previous configurations. With sufficient technology, those imprints can be read and restored, but their memories, their personalities, started Senator Thylix. Consciousness exists in quantum patterns that persist even after biological death, Sarah continued. Those patterns can be recovered and reconstructed. The people we restored are exactly who they were before, with all their memories and experiences intact. The implications were staggering. If humanity could bring back the dead, if they could rebuild entire civilizations from nothing, what else could they do? What other powers were they keeping hidden? As if reading their thoughts, Sarah addressed their unspoken concerns. I know what you're thinking. If we can do all of this, what else are we hiding? What other capabilities do we possess? The answer is that our technological abilities are limited only by our imagination and our sense of responsibility. She walked to the edge of the platform and looked out at the assembled delegates. We could reshape this galaxy according to our desires. We could eliminate poverty, disease, and conflict with a few simple commands. We could make every world a paradise and every species immortal. But we don't, because we understand something that took us thousands of years to learn. The hall was completely silent as everyone waited for her to continue. The most important power, Sarah said quietly, is the power to choose not to use your power. True strength is not in the ability to control others, but in the wisdom to let them control themselves. War Marshal Crusade stood up again, but this time his posture was one of respect rather than challenge. Admiral Chun, I owe you an apology. 3 months ago, I mocked your people as primitive and weak. I see now that you allowed us to believe that because it served a greater purpose. No apology needed, Marshal, Sarah replied. Your reaction was exactly what we expected and hoped for. It proved that you were thinking independently and making your own judgments. That's the sign of a healthy civilization. Speaker Veltar stood up and addressed the assembly. I believe I speak for the entire council when I say that we are grateful beyond words for humanity's protection. But I must ask the question that is on everyone's mind: what happens now? How do we move forward with this new understanding? Sarah smiled for the first time since entering the hall. You move forward exactly as you have been. You continue to build your alliance, develop your technologies, and solve your problems. The only difference is that you now know you're not alone in the universe. She activated her data pad one final time. The holographic display showed the human fleet, but now it was dispersed throughout the galaxy. Single ships stationed at the edges of council space, watching and waiting. Humanity will maintain a small monitoring presence in this galaxy, Sarah explained. Not to control or interfere, but to watch for threats that might be beyond your current capabilities. Think of us as your galactic immune system. Most of the time, you'll never know we're there. But when something truly dangerous appears, we'll be ready. And if we need help with smaller problems, ask Commander Zefta. Border disputes, trade conflicts, resource shortages, those are your problems to solve, Sarah replied firmly but kindly. We'll provide advice if asked, but only if asked. The strength you've built over centuries comes from facing challenges yourselves. We won't take that away from you by solving every minor difficulty. Admo Sectith raised a wing. What about the technologies you've shown us? Will we ever have access to dimensional warfare and quantum manipulation? Sarah considered this carefully before answering. Some technologies will be shared when you're ready for them. Others may never be shared because they're too dangerous for any single civilization to possess. And some you'll develop on your own, probably in ways we never thought of. She paused and looked around the hall again. But I will say this. The fact that you're asking these questions instead of demanding these technologies tells me that you're already on the right path to handling them responsibly. The session continued for several more hours as delegates asked detailed questions about galactic security, human capabilities, and future cooperation. But the most important points had already been established. Humanity would protect but not control. They would watch but not interfere. They would help but not replace the efforts of others. As the meeting drew to a close, Speaker Veltar made a formal announcement. The Galactic Council hereby recognizes the Earth Strategic Defense Fleet as the primary peacekeeping force for threats beyond our current capabilities. We also establish humanity as our guardian civilization with the understanding that this role comes with great responsibility and greater restraint. Sarah nodded formally. Earth accepts this responsibility. We pledge to protect this galaxy and its civilizations, while respecting their right to grow and develop according to their own choices. As the delegates began to file out of the hall, the atmosphere was one of quiet satisfaction mixed with awe. They had learned that they were part of something much larger than they had ever imagined. But they had also learned that they were valued and respected members of a community that spanned multiple galaxies. War Marshal Crusade approached Sarah as she gathered her materials. Admiral Chun, I have one final question. When you first presented your military capabilities 3 months ago, did you know then that the Devourers were coming? Sarah looked at the massive Zephyrian with an expression that might have been amused. Marshal, we've been tracking the Devourers for over 50 years. We knew exactly when they would arrive and exactly what it would take to defeat them. The only question was whether this galaxy's civilizations were worth saving. And your conclusion? Sarah smiled as she looked around the nearly empty hall. The Galactic Council is one of the most remarkable political achievements we've encountered. In 3 centuries of exploration, species with completely different biologies and cultures working together for the common good, it was definitely worth saving. As the last delegates left the hall, Sarah stood alone on the platform where she had been mocked just months earlier. The beings who had laughed at human primitive weapons now understood that humanity's greatest weapon had never been their technology. It had been their wisdom to use that technology responsibly. The galaxy was safe, not because humanity was strong, but because they were wise enough to know when and how to use their strength. And in the dark spaces between stars, 50 ships continued their silent patrol, watching over civilizations that were free to grow and develop because someone else was strong enough to let them.